Hey guys, in this video I want to tell you about my favorite data analytics instrument, the pivot table. Pivot table is really a lot. It's a very useful tool that can be used with minimum handwork. Also, the function for pivot table exists in pandas, so you can easily implement it without adding any additional libraries to work with your table. But firstly, let's talk a little bit about what pivot table is. So, a pivot table is a structure that allows you to extract the significant information from a large dataset. Sometimes the dataset is so large and you cannot extract any important insights from that by just looking at it or calculating some basic statistical metrics. Sometimes you need to split it into categories or do some more than just calculating something. So with pivot table you can group items, you can count the number of items, you can sum them, you can calculate any statistical thing. You can also define your own function and use it to calculate whatever you want. So the pivot table is really customizable. You can do whatever you want with that, and it's really nice and it deserves a lot of attention from everyone who is interested in data analysis. So let's go and look how it works in pandas. So as you can see, I already imported some data. It's a Titanic data, so here is some data about the passengers on Titanic and about their status, if they survived or not. So right now we will extract some features of this big data set because it has 900 rows, so it's very difficult to measure something just looking at the data. So let's do some analytics here. It is really easy to create a pivot table. First, we need to define the name of our dataset, which is the f dot, and then the function pivot table. That's all. But it is not enough because we also need to define some parameters of this function. First one, which we will use, is index. Index is the column by which we divide the dataset. For example, we have a status survived or not. If a person survived, it is 1. If not, it's 0. So for example, we want to split the data into two parts, for those who survived and for those who don't. So we can use index of survived. So here we use the name of the column which we want to use without any brackets or anything, because we already defined the dataset we are working with. So let's do that. Okay, we have a new table in which I can see that survived become an index, and we have all other numeric columns, only numeric because it's very difficult to calculate the mean, and mean is the default here for the categorical variables. So it is only defined for the numerical one, and that's why they're here. So for example, what does it mean right now? For example, we have age column, and we have two classes, survived or not. We see that the mean age, the average age for a person who did not survive is 30 years. And the average age for those who survived is 28 years. So there is really a lot of statistics here, and that's really important that we see it. But this is a really simple one, and now we will go further and build something more interesting. Right now, we will try to do multi-index pivot table, and also we will define only one column to look at. So right now, let's do multi-index. For this, we write the same as we wrote, the name of the dataset and pivot table method. Then we define the index. Index in this case is multi-index as we want. For example, we want to split the data into those who survived and not, and also by gender, if it's male or female. So let's create a multi-index. To do that, we need to use a list in which we will have the names of columns we want to use for multi-index. So let's create a list with square brackets. Then we need to define two columns, which is survived and sex, because we want to use gender. Then we need to also define the values. For example, I want to understand what's the mean fare for those who survived or not, and for those who men and women. Values are these things that are here. So the numbers here are from the column which are stated in values. Here, as we didn't define values, it used all the columns. So here values are age, fare, parch, and other things. So let's go and select fare. Let's look at that. Okay, right now we have a pivot table which has multi-index. What does it mean? For example, we have this big index of 0 and this big index of 1, which include female and male for each of them. That means, for example, this row, 0 and female, is a woman who did not survive. This row, for example, are males which survived. So here we can see a fare of these people. For example, the mean fare, the average fare for a woman who did not survive is $23, while for a woman who survived is $52. So, for example, why do we need this information? Okay, we can see that if a person paid more, it is more likely that he or she survived. So it can be useful information in this case. Let's go further and build something more interesting and use more parameters of pivot table. So we are writing the same thing as usual, df pivot table, and then, for example, I want to use different statistics, not average. What do I need to do? I need to define my index. It will be survived in this case, only one index. Then I also want to define columns. What is columns? For example, here we have survived and sucks as 2 indexes, so it's multi-index. Sometimes this table can be really big and it can be difficult to look at it, because, for example, one category can have not 2 values, 2 possible values, 0, 1, or female and male, but more of them. So it will become a very big and not really nice to see. So we can do it as columns. So we can have 2 columns for female and male. Let's look at how it will look like. So columns are sex, and values will be fare, as we looked at before, and the functions. For example, we want to use different functions for fare. For example, we want to have maximum and average fare at once in one data frame. So for that, we need to define the list of needed metrics. So we have max and we have min. And let's look how it will look like. Okay, so here you can see that we have survived as index. We have sex as columns. For each metric we have max and min. We have both sexes. So for example, if we look at this column, we can see that for female who did not survive, the maximum value was 151. If we will look at this value, we know that for male who survived, the average value is 41. So this pivot table gives us a lot of information, and it is really easy to build it. I encourage you to try it yourself after the lesson. So it will be a little bit easier for you to create your own pivot tables. Let's go further and create the custom function. Custom function is the topic which is not stated anywhere. I don't know why, but I like custom functions, and sometimes it can be really easy and really helpful to do it. For example, we want to look at the range of fares for a man and a woman who survived and who not. So what we can do? We can also create a function which will calculate the range. Let's call it range function. Then we need to put series as a parameter. It's just the name of argument. It's not the type of data from pandas, which is series. No, it's just the name to help you understand what goes into this function. Then we need to return something, and as it's the range, we just need to find the max of the series and subtract a mean of the series from it. So that's all. That's our function. Now we can create a pivot table. So let's do it. Def pivot table. Now we state the index, which is survived, the columns, which is sex, the values, which is fair in this case, and egfunc. There is a very interesting part. We just use a range function. Here we do not use any quotations or something like that because we use self-defined functions. We don't need these quotation marks as here. Let's create it. Okay, we can see that for a female that survived, the range is 144, which is a really interesting thing. And that's really nice that we can create a custom function and use it in the pivot table. Sometimes it can be really useful. Let's go and look at one more interesting feature of a pivot table, which is to use different metrics for different values that you can use. For example, I want to create a pivot table where my index will be different classes and also a sex of a person. So class is just like first class or second or third class. It means the quality of the ticket. So we have multi-index here, and now we need to define egg function. And here we will actually write values that we will use, so we don't need to write values anywhere else. For example, we want to have min and max for fair for every kind of person, and we also want to have a mean age or the average age. It is different values, fair and age, and it is also different metrics, which is min, max and average. So we will write it as a dictionary in which the key will be and the values will be the functions we will use. As here we want to use min and max for fairs, we need to define a list of them. So let's do min and max. Right now we also will use another pair of values and functions. So it will be age, and the value will be min, as we want to use an average age. So we can see that for every class and for every sex, we have two parts for two values that we use with different metrics. So from this table you can see that, for example, male in the first class had a minimum fair of 0, while a female in second class has a mean age of 28 years. It's really useful to look at this information with just using one line of code. One more very interesting thing I will show you is the totals, because totals is really interesting thing. Let's create a pivot table in which we will calculate the number of people who survived and who not, and with different sexes. So let's define index, which will be survived as usual. We also have columns, which is sex in this case. We will have values as fair, but a really interesting thing here. As we want just to count number of people, we can use any values we want, like any column, because we will just count them. So we can actually use anything. We can use fair, we can use p-class, we can use anything for count function. So it really doesn't matter what we use. So let's define egfunc, which is count. And to show totals, okay, let's look at that without totals. So it's a very easy table in which we can see, like, for example, a number of non-survived females is 81 and other things, yeah. So now we want to create totals. So for this we can just write margins is equal to true. And now we can see totals. For example, we can see that the number of non-survived people is 549, or we can see that the number of males is 577. So it's really useful to look at that. I think I have shown you a lot of functionality of pivot tables and now you are in love with them. I really love them myself, and you can do whatever you want with them and make a lot of interesting things. I wish you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, give me some likes, and watch the next video. Goodbye, guys. When I'm